Acts 24. This is Paul's answer for himself before Felix. So after 5 days, the high priest Ananias came along with all the elders. Everyone thought they were wonderful. And they brought with them an orator called Tertullus. Now, an orator is somebody who knows how to speak. And they brought this man with them because they thought that he could make their case against Paul even worse. They had come to try to persuade the governor, Felix, that he should really kill Paul. And so they brought this man Tertullus with them to try to use nice words to persuade the governor to do something horrible, which was to kill Paul. This is the trouble with people who use nice words, and that's why life is nice words and saying things nicely in a nice way when actually you're doing something horrible to somebody. So let's learn from this. So this Tertullus starts up. He says, "Seeing that by you we enjoy much peace, and that by your providence," these are all fancy words, "everything is done right by you to this nation. We accept it in all ways and in all places, most excellent Felix, with all thanks. But, so that I'm not tedious to you with my words, I beg you to kindly hear us of your grace a few more words." How annoying. This guy is just using all these fancy words to try to get the governor to get Paul basically killed. So, fancy words, that's the trouble. So he goes on, "We have found this man, Paul, a pestilent fellow, and someone who makes riot and upset among all the Jews all over the world." Now, just because Paul preached that Jesus is the Messiah, of course some Jews accepted it and some didn't. So there was going to be a division amongst the Jews, just as Jesus in that sense is the cause of division amongst people. But then they say, "Oh, well, that's wrong. You're therefore a bad person," and start calling him all these silly names. "And he is a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes." Well, Jesus was from Nazareth, and so they call his group of people, his disciples who followed him, a sect, and they call Paul a ringleader, trying to make out that he's an awful man, a terrorist who's trying to hurt people. It just wasn't true. And moreover, this Tertullus goes on, he tried to profane the temple, that is, by bringing Gentiles into the temple. Well, that was not true. They'd simply seen Paul in Jerusalem in the streets with a man called Trophimus from Ephesus, who was a Gentile, and they liked to imagine that Paul had managed to bring this man into the court of the temple that was only for the Jews, and that is not true. But this Tertullus thought his fancy words is covering over then great big lies. And the Jews also supported the charge, saying that this really was the case, so they were all lying. But they did it all in a very nice way, and this is what people do to this day. And when the governor had invited Paul to speak, Paul replied, "I know that you've been for many years a judge to this nation."
I've seen lots of people do that to each other.
Yeah, we've got
really fancy words, and then they just turn against somebody and attack.
That's right. So we've got to be careful we're not like these people here, but to be truthful. That's why Jesus says, "Let your yes be yes and your no, no." In other words, just speak plainly and simply and tell the truth. So Paul replies, "I know that you've been for many years a judge to this nation, to the Jews, so therefore I more cheerfully can answer for myself. You can check out that it was only 12 days ago that I came here to Jerusalem to worship. Not in the temple, not anywhere did they find me arguing with anyone, nor stirring up a crowd, not in any synagogues, nor in the city. And they cannot prove to you the things which they're now accusing me of. But I will tell you this much, but after the way which they call a sect, that is how I worship the God of my fathers, believing all things according to the law of Moses, and all things that are written in the Jewish prophets. I have hope toward God, which they also themselves look for, that there will be a resurrection of the dead, both of the righteous and the unrighteous. The Pharisees amongst them were like Paul. They believed in a resurrection. Now he says that I believe in a resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous. What that means is that those people who've known God's ways but have said no to them will also be resurrected. It's not just good people resurrected. There'll be bad people as well who'll be resurrected, and they'll be punished with what the Bible calls the second death. They died once in this life, then they get resurrected and judged, and then they die the second death, and that time they stay dead forever. And so he says, well, that's my hope. And he said, I am very careful to always have a conscience that is without any offence toward God and towards men. So at the end of every day, he tried to ensure that he knew in himself that he had really tried to do what he could for God and for men. That's a wonderful thing to be able to say. So he goes on, after many years, I came to bring some gifts and charity, both money and things, to my nation, the Jews, and some offerings. So he'd actually come to help the Jews, not because there was a famine going on, not to make trouble for them. And some Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, so he'd cleansed himself as he had to. He, as a Jew, could go into the temple. He said there was no crowd, there was no argument, and those Jews who say they saw this happening, that I supposedly took a Gentile into the temple, they should be here before you, and they should make the accusation if they have anything against me. But of course they weren't there, because they hadn't seen him. This hadn't happened. Or else let these men who are accusing me, let them actually say what wrongdoing they found in me, when I stood before their council, apart from over one word that I cried as I stood among them. I simply said, about the resurrection of the dead, that's why I'm being called in question before you this day. Felix knew about the way. Now, the way is another way of talking about the Christian faith at that time. And he said, when Lysias, the chief captain, comes down, I will again decide your matter. And so he ordered the centurion that he should keep Paul in charge, and that he should have some freedom and should not be forbidden to have his friends visiting him and coming to minister to him. And I expect they brought him maybe some warmer clothes and some food, because that's what you had to do to your friends in prison in those days. You had to take them food. And after some days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was a Jewess, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. And as Paul preached to him about righteousness and self-control and the judgment which is to come, Felix trembled. Well, isn't that amazing that Paul was on trial really for his life, and yet he uses it as an opportunity to preach. And he preaches to the point that Felix trembled. This great powerful man realized, as Paul spoke about the need to be self-controlled, which he probably wasn't, this Felix, as he preached about righteousness and that the day of judgment is coming, this great man trembled. He was frightened. This is the power of the gospel. And then he said, well, Paul, when I have some convenient time, I'll call you again. But actually he was hoping that money would be given him by Paul to set him free. After 2 years, Felix was replaced by Porcius Festus. And Felix, because he wanted to do the Jews a favour, left Paul bound in prison. So 2 years, there he was, poor Paul. He could have been thinking, if only I was free, I could go and preach. Just like somebody who has got health problems might think, if only I had better health, I could preach. Or we might think, if only I had this, then I could preach. But you know, God has given each of us the set of circumstances that he knows is best for us. And he'd given Paul these 2 years, and who knows, maybe it was during that time that he thought out some of the ideas that he later writes in his letters, or maybe that was when he helped Luke to write the Acts of the Apostles up to this point. There was a purpose. We may not see the purpose now in this life, but when Jesus comes back, then we will see why everything happened as it happens. And that's why we've got to try not to be too frustrated, but to realise that really nothing is chance, and God is love, and God is in control to do us good at our latter end.